Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Really excited coming up. We're going to talk to Congressman Dan Crenshaw about his new book, and we'll talk about China and COVID and all this other stuff as well. I got to start off here, though. I'm sure you've seen by now this viral video of two physicians in Bakersfield, California. They set up Bakersfield's only private walk-up testing center for COVID, like an urgent care center. Accelerated urgent care is what they run. They had a press conference a couple days ago to release their findings. They had 5,213 tests. And they've concluded that COVID has a 0.03% death rate. Not, maybe at first there's some people who are like, it could be as high as like 5%. That's been tempered down to like 1%. But some people are saying, no, it's like the flu, which is a 0.1%. And again, that's not even right because there's different age groups where it's different, but 0.1%. These guys are saying, what are you at? It's 0.03% death rate. Now, here's the deal with this. Everyone who thinks that this whole COVID reaction thing is overblown has showed that video to me and everyone they know 1,000 times over because these two guys in scrubs agree with them. I don't mean to demean these guys. I'm making the point that we all gravitate towards the things that agree with us. It's a powerful force. Probably, I think it's one of it might be the most powerful force, certainly in media world. And it gets all of us all the time. I was reading something just yesterday about how China doesn't really control 96% of our antibiotics. You've heard me say that many times here on the show, that China controls 96% of antibiotics. And I'm reading this article about how that's not true, and I ignored it. I deleted it. I distinctly remember, I was reading it and I was like, wait, this disagrees. This isn't what I thought. And then I started reading and it was like, adding new, and I was like, man, I stopped reading because it didn't agree with me. Now, I know I have a service to provide for you to get the facts as best as we know it. And I absolutely should have taken the time to read their argument. It was in the National Review. He's a guy from Cato. He's a professor at Duke. But I did not want to. That's how strong that force is. I was like, I don't want to know the truth. I just want to know what I know what I know. And it aligns with the things I've been saying and the things I believe. So I don't need, and it happened to me yesterday. Now, that's why we're going to talk with Rosemary Gibson coming up, author of China RX, and I sent her the article, so we're going to talk about it more. But I share that just to say, like, we all do this. So 20% or so of people who think that this is completely overblown, they gravitated to these doctors and have lifted them up as heroes. See, these people agree with me. So the other day, I was preparing a whole debunking of these guys and their statements and everything. And I started doing it, and I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. Nothing I say will make a difference. If you agreed with their conclusions, nothing I could possibly say would convince you or that person otherwise. If you agree with them already, nothing I say can change your mind. And that's an interesting phenomenon in humans, isn't it? Again, we all do this to certain extents. What is it in our human nature that makes that the case? We talk about Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, amazing book. We have our tribal allegiances, but I don't know. It's not a good thing. Just think about it. Like if you agree with these doctors, just be honest with yourself. If I told you agree with their conclusions that this is 0.03% death rate and it's all overblown and blah, blah. If you agree with that, and then I told you that the American College of Emergency Physicians and the American Academy of Emergency Medicine each sent out statements condemning these two, would that change your mind at all? That these two groups said that these guys they released biased, non-peer-reviewed data to advance their personal interests without regard for the public's health. Does that, there's a little bit of you, does that cause you to say, oh, geez, wow, okay, I guess maybe I should look more into how they came to that conclusion? No, it doesn't. Not a single person will ever. If anything, it strengthens your support of these two because it sets up this like, oh, the man is trying to silence, right, the truth, and these colleges, they're the man, and these guys are the. So it just strengthens your defenses of it. And of these two, even more. I could quote doctor after epidemiologist, after virologist, after statistician to debunk these two, and it won't matter. And that's not good. And it's true for me too. Now, I want to be clear on one thing. I do not believe that just because a majority of people think something that they therefore must be right. That's not, I don't believe that at all. There's no evidence, right? There's so many stories that we've been sharing for years of consensus being one thing, and then there's one lone voice in the wilderness. Like my favorite story is Semmelweis. Semmelweis in the mid-1800s, like 1850 or so, he said, hey, we should wash our hands to stop the spread of infection. We have all these pregnant women or these women who are delivering babies who they die of infection later. Maybe we should wash our hands after we get back from the morgue. And everyone, he got kicked out of the medical community. He got kicked out, he ended up dying in an insane asylum because he was the guy who said we need to wash our hands. And maybe that will stop women from dying in childbirth. All right, so he was a lone voice of truth that the majority silenced. So I am usually in great support of that lone voice of truth. That's not these guys. These guys are wrong. Every statistician, every stat teacher watching that video of these guys, their heads exploded with the mistakes that these guys made. The very short of it, if you care, the conclusions they made were based off of their sampling. And I heard one analysis, they put it nicely, he said, that would be like sampling a communion line to figure out how many Catholics live in California, or estimating the prevalence of alcoholism by sampling an AA meeting. And that was their foundation for the conclusions that they then went on to make. Listen, friendly reminder, we got to be better, right? Right now, you're not watching cable news. And you're not watching cable news for a reason, because it's awful, okay? It's awful, and it's a total waste of time. So let's be better than that. And a friendly reminder that we need to be able to change our minds with new information. Totally okay to have believed these guys at first. And then someone says, oh, actually, no, there's a major statistical error that these guys made, which invalidates the conclusions. And it's okay to say, oh, man, darn it. I thought I was tricked. And I trusted these guys because they were doctors and they agreed with me, but okay, I'm going to learn some more. We got to be able to say that. And I feel this pressure all the time. All the time. A couple months ago when this whole thing first started, we did a segment right here about how this is no big deal. The whole Wuhan flu is no big deal. Learn more, change my mind. I've been saying it's something kind of big right now. And now I'm saying we need to open up, right? We need to go back to living a little bit more. And I'm getting hit by people who say, oh, Slater, we're not opening up fast enough. See, you were wrong this whole time. You were wrong this whole time, Slater. It's like, oh, geez. And then I'm also getting hit by people who say it's not time to open up yet. And both of these camps have been camped out in their position this entire time. And I don't think anything's going to change their minds moving forward. And that's not good because things are moving every single day. Things are changing every single day. I'm going to take a break because I want to leave more room for Dan Crenshaw. But let me come to these two guys' defense here real quick. We'll add a little nuance to the situation. The video of these guys, it hit 5 million views on YouTube. 5 million views, and YouTube took it down. YouTube took it down. I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if the medical groups told YouTube to take it down. I don't know if YouTube just decided to do it on their own. I have no idea. But that's not right either. Let them make their case and let people debunk it properly. And we all learn something in the process. Shutting down speech only gives the people who think that this is overblown, and not only overblown, it gives the people who think that this is like some sort of grand conspiracy, it just gives them even more ammunition. Not helpful. It's not helpful to shut things down like that. Let people speak. Let these doctors speak, even if their stats and their statistical analysis is very far off. So again, friendly reminder, be very aware, in you and me, of the most powerful force of human nature, and that is to gravitate to conclusions that agree with you, and to therefore never change your mind. It's not a good thing in normal times, and it's especially unhelpful in times of massive uncertainty, which is what we're living in right now. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, coming up next. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, what an honor to talk to our next guest. Of course, former Navy SEAL, current Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Congressman, how are you, sir?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you. Got a new book, Fortitude, American resilience in the era of outrage. All right, I got a ton of questions. First of all, I loved your interview with Bill Maher the other day when you were promoting this book. There was one moment in particular when he said something about President Trump and how President Trump's lying or something. And it wasn't just what you said, I forget exactly what you said, but it's how you said it. And I can't simulate it here, but it was something like, why do you think he was lying? Or what was he lying? It was so calm, where everyone else would have come back harder. You stayed calm. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Well, I actually talk a little bit about combative interviews in the book. There's a chapter called "Be Still," and I mean that quite literally in the book. It's just be still, just be a good test taker. You know, don't let your emotions get the best of you. And so there's some methods to be good at that. One of them is wargaming. So you have to wargame everything you do. You should always be debating somebody, if that's your job, right? Like, I mean, if it's not your job, I don't know why you would always be debating somebody in your head, but it is my job, as it turns out, just like it's Bill Maher's job. And in this particular case, there's a way to win an argument and there's a way not to. And you also have to define winning. Winning should mean persuading somebody. That should be the definition of winning. The problem, and I write about this in my book too, the problem is that we've started to redefine what is good and what is heroic and what is winning in our culture. And that usually these days it means somebody who's the angriest, the loudest, the most passionate, the one who owns the other guy. But that's not really winning. I mean, a winning argument would be sophisticated and nuanced and actually persuasive. And the problem is, one, too many leaders, too many public officials do the former thing, the passionate fist shaking, and too many people pay attention to it. So there's an incentive to do it.
I'm so over that. Do you think people are getting over the whole outrage thing, or is that just with us forever?
It's up to all of us to get over it. That's the problem. So no, I don't. I don't think we're getting over it because I say that because the media keeps doing it, and politicians keep doing it, public figures keep doing it. So the fact that they keep doing it means there's some kind of incentive to keep doing it. And that incentive is a number of likes and clicks and all that. And as long as Americans keep falling for it, they'll keep doing it.
I just hope people saw that interview and everything you do with that regard, and people are like, oh, there's another way. Like, oh, that's an option. Because I like how that felt way more than I feel living in outrage mode all the time. Can you talk on this point? Can you speak about drown proofing? I think this fits perfectly in the be stillness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk about drown proofing as the SEAL way of teaching stillness. And we teach it in the most barbaric way possible, which is we put you in the water and we see if you don't panic, even when your hands are tied behind your back and your feet are tied together. And as it turns out, you can actually swim that way and keep breathing and surviving. But if you panic even just a little bit, if you lose your cool even just a little bit, you will sink. And so drown proofing is again, it's a literal term. It means proofing yourself from drowning in the unlikely scenario that you happen to be thrown into the water with your hands tied behind your back and your feet tied together.
How has going through SEAL training and being a SEAL, how had that changed you as a person the most? And then maybe how has being a congressman for these last couple of years changed you as a person?
I mean, I think the defining sense of self does come from the SEAL teams. That always will. That is a far greater effect on your character than anything else possibly could, because there's a real microculture in the SEAL teams. We can spot each other from afar quite easily. If you're talking to a guy who was a prior SEAL or special operations, you can just tell. Like we have the same sense of humor. We sort of know each other, even if we don't know each other. And that will never change. I think if you knew me in college versus, a few years into the teams, you would have recognized quite a different person. Has Congress changed me? I don't think so. It's just a different challenge. I've learned a lot, but I don't know that it's changed me.
Well, give me something you've learned maybe perhaps about, let me narrow it a little bit. Something you've learned about people and human nature since being a congressman.
Yeah, a lot. I've learned a lot. I've learned how different sides think in a deeper way than maybe I did before. I've learned more about how conservatives think because, before running for Congress, I was never involved in conservative activism. If anything, I had a much deeper insight into liberal activism because I went to Harvard. I went to Tufts University. I spent 10 years in California. San Diego is not very political. It's not a very political town, but still, it's certainly not conservative either. And so my philosophy has always been conservative. From the policies, my policy preferences were always conservative, but I never saw conservative activists, and that's a different thing. And in my book, I critique both sides that engage in outrage culture. I think both sides do it differently. I think the left's way of doing it is worse. I think objectively speaking, it's worse, and I think it's more widespread. But that doesn't mean conservatives are innocent either. It doesn't mean we also don't elevate those passionate, angry voices to too high of a level. I do see that happening too often, and I don't see enough deeper thinking into why we even think what we think.
Can you give me an example? Not of a person, but of a conservative activism tactic, perhaps, that we kind of got to back off on.
Well, it's just, gosh, I don't know. I think the example is more like the inability to move past a certain talking point, and to give people a deeper explanation for why we think what we think. As far as examples, you catch me a little flat-footed on that one.
Sure.
One example I use in the book is this time last year when this guy basically goes on Instagram drinking a bunch of whiskey and he's drunk as hell, and the cops are outside his door, and he's telling everybody on Instagram that it's a red flag law enforcement, that they're coming after him because he's got 30-round capacity magazines in his house. And what that created was this insane blow up on social media. Like, he gained like 100,000 followers overnight. People raised a bunch of money for his legal fees. People actually went to the site in New York, and people overwhelmed the 911 system with calls and almost took down the system. But none of it was true. It turned out that this guy, he was wanted on multiple felonies and all sorts of things. It had nothing to do with guns.
Yeah.
But people let emotional reasoning take hold, and they just believed this drunk guy on Instagram. Like that.
We literally kicked off the show doing a whole segment on how quickly we gravitate to the things we want to believe, and how difficult it is to change our minds once we do that. And that's a major problem moving forward. It's a perfect example. What are some of your inputs, Congressman? Because you're in quite a hectic area, place, and a ton happening, and people pulling you in every direction. So I guess this kind of ties into the staying calm as well, but also being wise and growing and all. So what are some of the inputs that you make sure you have every day? Otherwise, you'll go crazy.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a difference between knowing the facts as you know them now and being wise and having a sense of wisdom. And so, again, if you want to understand why I'm so conservative, it's because I believe conservative philosophy is based in wisdom, thousands and thousands of years of it, from Judeo-Christian history, from the Bible. And I reference the Bible quite a bit. I'm not somebody who can recite, different scripture just, off my sleeve. I just can't do that. But I understand the importance of the Bible and its foundations for how we think and how our culture is. And what you find is a lot of the things you think that you probably just know to be true, even if you're an atheist, a lot of those lessons do come from the Bible because they inform our Western culture. Okay, so wisdom is important, and things that have worked for a very long time are really important. And it's important to know how those things, whether those are political things or cultural things or religious things or economic things, how those inform our current policies and how we use those truths, those foundations, to inform our opinions, and take in the facts that are presented to us right now.
So I'm reading this book right now about mental models. There's just a good little overview of a bunch of different mental models that people use, and that we need to have at our disposal. So I'm sure through the SEALs, you've learned a bunch of different mental models. What are they using in Congress that are either working or not working? And you're like, oh, you guys aren't even like looking at this the right way, or your priorities or your allegiances or whatever are way off from how they should be.
Well, what do you mean? Well, I can answer that question, but give me an example of a mental model. What do you mean by that?
The chapter I just read was about thought experiments and the importance of looking at second, third order effects of things and running through different scenarios. You kind of talked about wargaming a second ago. This is literally the chapter I just read was about that concept. So maybe people in Congress are not doing that type of thought process and instead are, acting off of this instinct.
Right. Now, of course, if you talk to any member of Congress, they think they're the most philosophical, evidence-based thinker that has ever walked the halls of Congress. Of course, I think differently, and of course, I think that about myself, just like every other member does think that about themselves. But listen, when I describe the way to approach governance, and again, the reason I'm a conservative is this: we have a framework with which we want to solve problems. Okay. I view Democrats as just wanting to solve problems, but they don't have a framework with which to do it. They're not always wrong about the problem they want to solve. Okay, you want everybody to have access to healthcare? Me too. But I think you're not thinking about the second and third order consequences when you want to solve this problem. You're deliberately ignoring them. You're taking the easiest emotional path to solving a problem mostly because you think that'll get you reelected in the quickest way possible. And you know that emotional arguments are more persuasive than evidence-based arguments. From a political perspective, people know that, and they use that as opportunism. Conservatism, I believe, it has limiting principles, first of all. Limiting principles are so important. You have to ask certain questions, like, are we removing people's freedoms for a good reason here, or are we not? That's a really good question to ask. I don't think the left really asks that question. Okay, are we adding too much money? Are we adding too much money to our debt? That's a very simple question, but it's a question that doesn't get asked enough. Are there second and third order consequences to this action? Pretty good question. If we're going to give people a service, are we going to infringe on somebody else's right just to make this thing happen? Another good question. This applies to a lot of policy discussions, but these are very basic questions. Does the policy feel good or do good? Well, that's a pretty good question. We like to implement programs that supposedly do good, but then the evidence doesn't bear that out. But they're for the nice stuff, right? I mean, you were such a good person for wanting to help, the puppies, and you wanted to spend more money than the other guy to help those puppies. And that guy's a bad person because they didn't want to double the funding for the puppy program. And how could they? It's the puppies. And so this kind of thing happens all the time. It's bad reasoning on a terrible level. It's the reason we have a lot of debt. It's the reason we have a lot of government overreach. And it's also the reason we have a lot of resentment in American society. If you haven't noticed, people are very resentful. Okay, so what causes that? Well, a couple of things. Politicians, one, always telling you that the other side is evil and that they want to screw you and that they're hiding all of these benefits from you, that if they were just nicer people, they being Republicans, that they would just give them to you, right? Like as if the federal government just has this stockpile of free stuff that we could just give you. My colleagues would like to make you think that's true, and that if that other politicians weren't so evil that you could just have that stuff. This causes resentment. It causes a serious amount of resentment, and I think we see it every day in our political discussions.
Yeah, so well said. I love this concept of limiting principles. I want to look more into that. That's such a good point. Congressman, you've been super generous with your time, so I hate to do this, but like one minute or so, can you talk about shame? You have a chapter in here about shame, and I've been thinking about this recently about how we need to totally, I don't want to say redefine, but get back to the true definition of it. So I'm looking forward to reading that chapter, but can you give us the quick overview of it?
It's a great chapter. It's about having a balance of shame, both in how we shame others and how we shame ourselves. Okay, and we're totally out of balance right now. As a culture, we're out of balance in the sense that either we apologize profusely when we didn't even do anything wrong, or we don't apologize at all when you clearly did something wrong. And there's a reason for that. The incentives or the outrage mob kind of incentivizes those kind of reactions. And then the chapter goes into a more practical discussion about, listen, very simply, feel bad about what you do. Just feel bad about it. You missed the gym today? Feel bad about it. You didn't put your shopping cart back? Feel bad about it. Okay? Like there's If you didn't wash your hands before you touch somebody, you should feel bad about it. Like, don't rationalize your bad behavior.
Yeah, I feel like we go to extremes, right, in our culture. So like, you should never have any shame. Like, you should be proud of everything you do all the time, no matter what. And I think you should have shame about things. Should people be shamed for doing bad things?
Yeah, but there should be some redemption involved with that shame. Listen, there's nothing wrong with everybody being mad at, and I use plenty of examples on both sides of the aisle. I try to use Republican and Democrat examples, or just non-political examples. But, like Ralph Northam deserved to be shamed for that he deserved to be asked hard questions about that yearbook photo. But what did he do? He just ignored it. He literally he never actually gave an explanation. Never. The entire time. And of course, the firefighting media who just, they'll do anything to cover for a guy like him. Yep. I saw Washington Post articles written fairly recently talking about how he emerged from that scandal. And it's like, he didn't do anything. He didn't even ask for forgiveness. You should be able to ask for forgiveness, and it should be able to be given. But you know why? Okay, but why didn't he ever ask? Because there's no point. Because the outrage mob will never subside. They will never forgive. Because there is no
redemption. The whole process has been crushed.
It's broken.
There's no circle. Yeah. All right. Congressman Crenshaw, Fortitude, American Resilience in the Era of Outrage. Go buy it right now. Congressman, keep up the wonderful work, sir.
Thanks for having me.
True story, Mike Slater. More coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we've been talking a lot about China recently, obviously. Coming up on Friday, we have a special called COVID-19 Made in China. We're going to talk a lot about China's global ambitions to take over the world. And we'll talk about supply chains as well, which is a very purposeful thing that China's done over the years to take over the supply chains of the world, including ours. Someone who's been way in front of this is Rosemary Gibson. She wrote a book a while back called China RX, exposing the risks of America's dependence on China for medicine. She's a senior advisor at the Hastings Center, has been way in front of this and is a wealth of necessary information. Rosemary, how are you today?
I'm great, Mike. So happy to be with you. Thank you.
And I'm so glad you're here. So I thought of you the other day. I was reading this article in the National Review by a professor at Duke, so at Cato Institute, Scott Lincecum. And I thought of you because there are some statements here that are different than things that you and I have talked about and have heard you write about. Can I just read a couple sentences and we can kind of make sense of it here? So we've talked before about how a lot of our antibiotics and medicines and everything come from China. So he says this, he says, China supplied, he said that's not true. He said China supplied almost 30% of all imported essential medical equipment, masks, PPE, ventilators, in 2018, but accounted for only 9% of total domestic consumption because American producers supplied the vast majority, more than 70% of those products. So which is closer to the truth, Rosemary?
Sure, let's talk about our medicines.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of news out there fake news that's trying to downplay our dependence on China, which to me is a grave disservice to the American people. It's really deeply unfortunate. Here's the fact. And I'm going to be talking about our generic drugs. Okay. They are 90% of the medicines we take. And some of that data that other people provide, they add all these brand names. I'm talking about the generic drugs that are the bread and butter of our healthcare system. These are the medicines that if you're hospitalized with coronavirus, or if you're seriously ill, or if you got an infection, pneumonia or bronchitis, you're going to get a generic antibiotic and other generic medicines. So these are the generics. These have become commodities. 10% of our generic drugs, the finished drugs, the pills we take, are made in China. 10 years ago, it was nothing.
Okay.
So what's in our drugs? They contain an active ingredient. That's what makes our medicine medicine. And I know this is getting wonky, but we really have the public.
Okay. Yep.
The public deserves to know the truth. The active ingredient is what makes the medicine medicine. And that's what people are writing about that you just quoted from. But where do they come from? You don't make active ingredients out of thin air. They don't fall from the sky. They're made of chemical molecules. Let's look, and how do you get that? And the FDA and the industry does not collect data on where all those early materials come from, because if you don't have them, you've got no medicine. So where do they come from? Here's the sources that I use. And I just, interestingly enough, I looked at this last night. I didn't know that we were going to talk about this today.
Yeah.
Let's look at India. India makes 25% of our generic drugs and is the top global generic producer. I think China is going to overtake India because China has subsidies and that's their plan. India, its generic industry depends on China for 70% of the chemicals it needs to make those active ingredients that make a medicine. That's why India was shutting down exports, because it couldn't get the chemicals from China. I have the sources from the Directorate of Commercial Intelligence and Statistics. Second point, look at the Dutch public television documentary. This is an industry person from Europe who's worked in the industry for 30 years. And he just came out last month. He said, China has control over the raw materials, these chemicals, for the world's medicine.
So you said 10% of our finished generics are from China. You said 10%.
The pills we take. But if you
That's
really
the finished product. So you're saying someone will say, "Oh, what's the big deal, Rosemary? It's only 10% of pills from China." But you're like, no. It's the active ingredients that come from China. Otherwise, there is no pill. So what percentage of active ingredients?
That's hard to know, but it's very high. It's high. India makes them, a lot of countries make them. But in talking about our dependence on China, as I interviewed people in the industry, we would have no medicines if China shut the door on those core chemicals needed to make. I'll give you an example. If you're hospitalized with coronavirus and you're really seriously ill, you're going to get sedatives. You might get antibiotics if you have a secondary infection. You need medicines to raise your blood pressure. You need a whole bunch of things. I asked a group of pharmaceutical engineers who are actually they're in the process now of making drugs in critical shortage. I said, so where does this stuff come from? They have to go on the global market and they have to get these chemicals. And he said that around the room, 3 different people, they said 90% of those ingredients China controls. Not the chemicals to make the active ingredient. Yep. So I went down the rabbit hole. Yeah, the industry has just refused to do. Yeah, so it's really unfortunate that they're
Let me throw one more your way. He says, according to the FDA, and this is right in line with what you're saying, according to the FDA, of the roughly 2,000 global manufacturing facilities that produce APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, only 13% are in China, 28% are in the US, 26% in the EU, and 18% in India. How would you account for that?
One, they're conflating the brand name drugs with generics. Number one. Okay. Number two, let's take a single plant in China. Because and the FDA testified to this. You can look at my test, your listeners can look at my testimony. You have one plant in China and it goes out of line, which has happened. It blows up or there's a problem with it. There's a global shortage.
Oh yeah, of course. They're putting
together plants that might make API for really, specialized, how X kilos a year. We're talking about China's producers. I'll show you stuff from the industry. I mean, this is just so unfortunate that people who are putting out fake information to deceive the American people. And let's go back to medical supplies. Did you see 1 million test kits for coronavirus were fake? They were not working, bought from China.
Yeah.
The UK got 3.9 million fake test kits that didn't work.
Yeah.
Spain
What's
got
that? Why would did China do that on purpose? Do you think, or are they just making junk? What's that about?
Well, I'll tell you something. If you do one of these tests with a fake or junk test kit from China, this tests your antibodies to see if you're immune or not. If you get a false reading, you could have false reassurance or not know if you've got it's terrible.
No, it's a big deal. No, it's a bad thing. Real quick, on the last thing, you're so right, because just to finalize this, there may be 2,000 global manufacturing facilities and only 13% are in China, but you're saying the few that are in China make a ton of the APIs, and we may have 28% of them, but they each make maybe a little bit of the API.
That's right.
That's a statistical, that's like stat 101 deception right there.
And the FDA acknowledged it, but people who look at these charts that the FDA put out and everybody's repeating it, it's really unfortunate that
I have about one more minute, Rosemary, and you're so wonderful, and obviously we're going to talk again if you will. What can you help us understand how much of this from China is intentional? How much of it is a happy accident for them? Or is this a concerted effort?
Well, I'll tell you, hundreds of Americans died 12 years ago with contaminated blood thinner. A lethal contaminant was put in, and it was knowingly done. It was patented in China. It was a fake substitute. It was done for economic reasons, but it was intentionally done for economic reasons. And I'll tell you something, it's going to be hard to know where China will cross the line and do something for economic reasons or something that's intentional.
Is the controlling of the supply lines intentional?
Absolutely. This is part of the plan. Look at the hearings on Capitol Hill. I didn't make this stuff up. I came in with no preconceived notions. China has a plan to become the pharmacy to the world and to dominate all the advanced industries that Western countries now are part of. The aim is to disrupt, dominate, and displace.
Disrupt, dominate, and displace.
That's right.
They've been doing that.
Look at our empty manufacturer API plant. I just visited an API plant, active ingredient plant here in the United States. Used to employ 400 Americans, all gone to China. We have a serious problem.
The last one wasn't there an antibiotic plant in Syracuse, New York? I used to live in Syracuse. I grew up in Syracuse. A Bristol Myers Squibb plant in Syracuse. It's not there anymore.
Yeah, that's one plant that used to produce 70% of the world's supply of penicillin. China dumped it on the global market. China dumped product on the global market and drove out their competitors, including the last penicillin. We cannot make, Mike, any generic antibiotic here in the United States. We can't make the medicines you give to your kids for ear infections that you need for bronchitis or strep throat, or God forbid you get sepsis and you're really sick. We can't make them. We can't make the stuff for anthrax.
Rosemary, we gotta get you in front of the president, and we gotta make some big changes on this. Rosemary Gibson, author of China RX, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. Please read it, and at the Hastings Center. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thanks for having me, the chance to correct the record. I'm on Twitter, Rosemary100.
Yes, thank you, Rosemary100, and follow the latest. Thanks, Rosemary. You're awesome. We'll talk again. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's end the show with some good news that I think needs to be reiterated based off of our conversation on Monday with Professor Rackaniello. And we're going to talk to him this Monday, and hopefully we talk to him every Monday because he's like the top virologist in the world. So why would we not? Again, he's a professor of virology at Columbia University. So he said two things that I haven't stopped thinking about. First, more long-term, he said, and he's like, you heard it here first. He thinks in 4 to 5 years, COVID will be just a cold. You just get a cold. I've never heard anyone say that before. And so what are you talking about? He said, well, there's a handful of other coronaviruses that are you just get the sniffles. And you get them over and over again, and it's no big deal. Sometimes you don't know, sometimes you just get it's no big deal. And he said, those coronaviruses have been around for hundreds of years, probably from bats, and we don't blink at it. And he said, COVID-19 one day will become that. He said within 45 years. 4 to 5 years, not 45, 4 to 5 years. That's his prediction. So that's great. Now I have no idea why he thinks that will happen. I think I was so taken aback by the prediction. So that's going to be my first question when we talk to him again on Monday is why? Like what? Because we hear about viruses mutating. Is that what that is? Is that a virus mutating over 4 to 5 years that would make it less severe? I have no idea what the science behind that is, but I'm definitely going to talk to you about that. But that's huge because, there's a dystopian future where this goes on forever, right? And he's like, no, a couple years, which I mean, still 4 to 5 years, but better than forever. And I really want to say this again because the president said something the other day, like he said something like the virus won't be around forever, or we're going to knock it out, or something like that. And the left is mocking him for such an idiot. But just a FYI, media, the top virologist in the country said pretty much the same thing, that this won't be around forever. So you can go ahead and mock him as being an idiot now. Second good news, he confirmed this because he actually brought this up 2 weeks ago, and I didn't say the same thing. I was like, wait, what? And I talked about it. I brought it up again the other day, Monday, and he confirmed it. He strongly believes that you can get it again, but the second time you get COVID, you won't get sick. Because there's been all this talk about reinfection, all this stuff. So you can, he's like, yeah, you can probably get it again, but you won't get sick the second time. You can spread it the second time, so that's bad, but you won't get sick again. You won't have to go to the hospital again or anything like that. So you don't have enough antibodies where you'll prevent yourself from getting it, but you have enough where you won't get laid out from it. And that's amazing news. And his big takeaway was that we need to, or can, start reopening things slowly again. Now, he said you can't just go back to normal, everyone go out and do whatever as you were before. He said that's just going to ramp it back up again. But he said slowly but surely people can start doing things again. And I think that's great. Let me talk a second about opening things up. So Sweden has remained open this whole time. They've probably done the least when it comes to shutdown of the developed world. I think really their only big thing they've done is prevent groups of 50 or more, so like banning concerts and stuff like that. So we're looking at the result. Let me back it up. Let me say one more thing first. This goes back to the beginning of the show. We're in such a time of uncertainty. We can't afford to make an opinion and stick with it no matter what. Right? Because we have this idea, it's not true, but that our opinions are our identity. That our opinions make us who we are. So we have an opinion and we don't ever want to change it because then it changes our identity, and that's a whole different thing that we need to, we don't want to ever change that. So I can't change any opinion I have. So I have to believe this thing because it defines who I am forever. So there's this massive incentive that to never change an opinion ever, because it's not safe and it changes your identity. And this is not true. I get that urge in normal times, but in times of massive uncertainty like this, no opinion should become an identity for you, right? Open the economy, don't open yet, open some things in certain ways. Like these are not identity statements about you as a person. So hold these opinions very loosely and allow them to change. And we need to let other people change their opinions on things as well, because we all have a very long way to go on this. So that's a better lead into this chart right here about Sweden. So they've done way less than anyone else. And a lot of people 3 weeks ago, I'm rooting for Sweden, by the way, but a lot of people a few weeks ago said, oh, Sweden, look, they haven't done anything and they're fine. Well, things have changed and they're not fine right now, right? So you see total deaths, way more than Denmark, Finland, or Norway. Don't look at cases, don't really matter, but look at the deaths per 100,000 residents, right? That makes it more equal. So 7 in Denmark, 4 in Norway, 4 in Finland, 21 in Sweden. So way more deaths per 100,000 people in Sweden. So you can't say, oh, they're fine, right? Like, oh, this is so overblown. Look, Sweden didn't do anything and they're great. Like, well, not really. Now, here's the nuance too. Sweden is still, I think, under their healthcare capacity line. So that's good. And remains to be seen, but they may be better prepared for a second wave of the virus to come. Maybe the second wave is going to hit those other countries a lot harder, but it won't hit Sweden as much. And so maybe in the end of this whole thing, I don't know, in a year or two, whatever the end is, 4 to 5 years maybe, who knows. But maybe at the end of this, maybe it all evens out. Maybe Sweden and Denmark end up having the same number of deaths per 100,000 people. Maybe in the end, Sweden does have fewer deaths somehow. I don't know how that maybe the second wave comes and Sweden, I don't know. But I share this just as a lesson and friendly reminder that we're so quick in human nature. We're so quick to try and make sense of things, right? Because we want to understand and we want to have this semblance of control. So we want to make sense of everything really quickly. So we want answers now. And we made a decision about Sweden. Oh, what they did was the right thing, see? And it's like, oh, well, we have a long way to go before you can really make a conclusion about whether or not they did the right thing or we did the wrong thing. We tend to look at microscopic data points. So same thing with maybe deaths in a city, right? Every day, the LA Times shows the graph of how many people died the day before. And we look at a day or two's worth of data to try to find a trend in deaths and make some big grand conclusion just based off of what happened the last 2 days. But you can't do that. We need a way bigger perspective. We say often that the Chinese people and Chinese leaders, they think in terms of centuries. That's just their mindset is centuries. And Americans, we think in terms of seconds. We need to be way more patient about making grand conclusions about anything. But you see people making conclusions left and right all the time. Conclusions and judgments. It's going to be a year at least before you can begin to make any conclusion about what policy worked best. But we're so quick to make sense of things. Too quick right now. Too quick to make declarative conclusions as opposed to, this is kind of the best information we have now, so let's try this and we'll see what happens. Like we're doing the best we can with what we have, and it's not a lot. That's what we need, as opposed to, oh, Sweden did the right thing, we're doing the wrong thing, you're an idiot. Like, well, come on. We shared yesterday, I think in this segment, we shared the story of the plague outbreak in Marseille, France in 1720. And the reason I shared that story is to prove that for hundreds and even thousands of years, people have been trying to figure it out based off of the limited information that they have at the moment. And it's so easy to go back and judge and be critical of people for making the wrong decision at the right. We can't be afraid to say, you know what, I don't know if Sweden did what they did is the right thing or not. I think it is, but we'll see. We have to have that posture moving forward. We have to have that humility as well. True story. Mike Slater. Be back tomorrow. Spread the word.